Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 in a series of videos for Blood Bowl, the 2016 edition. In this video, my eventual goal is hopefully be able to teach you to play the game to the point that when you bring the game home, you can basically open the box, pull out the player aid that comes with the game, and be able to play the game completely. Now, before we go anywhere, a couple things I want to cover. The first thing I want to cover is this player aid. While it is fantastic, and there are two and they come with the box, one for each one of the players, and I'll just stop right here and let you know that the players, people playing the game refers to them as coaches, while the miniatures on the table are actually the players. And it's very important, especially when you look at special play cards such as this one. It says a player can bring knuckle dusters to the board. Well, I'll let you know that unless you play with a really rough crowd, that's for the miniatures on the board only. Sorry, it's my attempt at humor here. Anyways, this player aid right here, it is very good. It does a great job, but it is missing a couple things. And these are things I am definitely going to cover and teach you how to play, because the game does come with basic rules and advanced rules, and let's be honest, the basic rules are really simplistic. Nobody plays with them, not even when you're learning the game, because they are really oversimplified. The way to play the game is throw in those advanced rules and have a heck of a lot of fun playing a tabletop version of fantasy football. So, cover really quick things. One thing is missing on the back, right above the kickoff table. It's missing the table where you roll to see how many of these special play cards players get to start with at the start of the game. So that's missing, and then on the front of it, where it lists all the possible moves that all the players on the board can attempt, it's missing two of the moves. One of them is the pass, where you just hand off a ball to a miniature next to you or a player right next to one of your players. And the other one is the fouling rules. Now, fouling, it's a little bit more advanced, but I suggest you play with the rule anyways, because it's part of the spirit of the game. So that's just a quick basic thing. One more thing to cover. I am not going to cover the league rules. That does come in a separate booklet, teach you how to play the league rules. This basic box just teaches you how to play the basic game itself, and it also comes with two teams. The Gouged Eye, which is the Orcs, and the Reichland Reavers, which is the human team. And these teams have been built using the full rules, and it teaches you how to make a team from scratch. But these are basically each $1 million teams, and they're each played against each other. Very asymmetrical, and they play differently. One's a very offensive, smash the other team into the ground. The other one's more of a running and throwing game type of team, but they play against each other very well as long as you play to their strengths. So each one of these teams are built in the basic rule books with 1,000,000 credits, but you can actually go ahead and rebuild these teams any way you want, and it does have the rules on how to build your team. But again, the league play rules are in a separate rule book. It's something I'm not going to cover at all. So let's go ahead and take everything down the table and teach you how to play Blood Bowl. Every single team starts with a dugout, and every one of the coaches gets their own dugout. And these are double-sided. You have one side for the humans, and then you have the other side, which is going to be for the orcs themselves. And it looks a little different, a little bit more orky. And also, I didn't mention this before, but this board itself is actually double-sided. You have the side that I have face up right now, which is for the human team. And then the opposite side is a little bit dirty, a little bit more orky looking for the orc side of the board, just for a little more fun. But every one of the coaches' dugouts is going to have a top section where you're going to track the score, because even though we're beating the snot out of each other, this is a fantasy football version, and we're trying to actually score touchdowns too. So every time a player scores a touchdown, they're just going to get an additional point. The track does stop at 8. I've never seen a team go that high, but just in case, I'm sure the team can keep scoring points beyond that, but I don't ever see that happening unless you have a total blowout. Maybe perhaps if you have some dark elf team versus the halflings, it might be possible, but I personally have never seen it happen. The next area is going to be the area of your dugout where you're going to keep your reserves, because you can never have more than 11 players on the board at any time. You can have less, and that will happen when a lot of injuries start happening, but you can never have more than 11 players on the board at any time. Now, each team in the starting set does come with 12 players, so that does mean when you set up, you need a first decision. You need to make sure you figure out which one of your players is not going to be on the board when you line up on the line of scrimmage. Next section is going to be the area of the board where you're going to put in all your players who have been knocked out. And there's a nice little reminder here that shows an 8 or a 9 on the injury table roll, which shows that if you get an 8 or a 9, that means they're knocked out. You put them in this section of your dugout. And then finally, you have your casualty section, which is just going to be basically out for the rest of the game section. If you're not playing league rules, and if you are playing league rules, well, it's a little bit worse off for you, but we'll cover that in a separate section when we talk about league rules in a separate video. But there's a nice to remind you that if you roll a 10, 11, or 12 on the injury table, guess what? You're a casualty, you're out for the rest of the game. The next thing we're going to see is we're going to show a track for the first half and a track for the second half that's going to track how many turns your team has taken. Now, this game is going to be played for 2 halves, just like regular American football. And the start of every single player's turn, before you do anything, otherwise it will be an illegal procedure, you have to do this. You need to advance this 1 space on the track before you start moving any of your players. If you fail to do this and the opposing coach notices that you failed to advance your turn marker before you take any actions at all, and any action is moving one of your players, rolling the dice, or anything like that. But if you fail to advance your track before that happens, the other team coach can call an illegal procedure. What a legal procedure means is that you must immediately give up one of your team rerolls, and if you're unable to give up one of your team rerolls, or you don't want to, your turn immediately ends and you suffer a turnover. The other option is if you don't have any team rerolls left and you don't want to give up your turn, you have to give the opposing coach one free team reroll. Very important thing to remember, so make sure you're advancing this track before you take any action with any of your players on the board. Anyways, you're just going to track this through the first half, advance it down, track it through the second half. Basically, every single team gets 16 turns. Finally, you have the team reroll section in the basic rules that come with the basic game for each one of these teams that have already been generated with the 1 million credits. The human team starts with 4 team rerolls, and the gouged eye, the orc team, starts off with 3 team rerolls. I'll explain what all that means in just a couple minutes, but I just want to cover the dugout. Now let's go ahead and explain how every one of these players work. As I mentioned earlier, the game is very asymmetrical. You're basically playing a very bashy team versus a very runny, throwy team. And that does mean that every one of these teams has a slightly different layout of players that they have on their team. Now there's 6 different positions in the game, and you're going to see a lot of these other positions are going to come into play with various expansions and various different rules. And if you want to get a quick idea of some of the differences between all these races, you can actually go to bloodbowl.com. All one word, BLOODBOWL.com. Don't go to Blood Bowl game unless you want to check out the PC version of the game. But basically, bloodbowl.com is a site that's run by Games Workshop. There's quite a few very nice downloads available on that site, including team rosters and various other things, and also the ability to see all 23 teams are available in the game. It's a free download. I suggest you go pick it up. Just get them an idea of what's going to be coming out for the future of the game. But my point is, there's various different teams, various different positions, and they all play slightly different. It's a very asymmetric game. So basically what we have is we have the human team, which comes with a blitzer, a thrower, a lineman, and a catcher. And then we have the orc team, which comes with a thrower, a black orc blocker, a lineman, and a blitzer. Now these terms are just basic ideas of exactly what their strengths are. It doesn't mean that's the only thing they can do. So for example, a blitzer can throw the ball, and a catcher can blitz. Just because they're called a catcher doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means they're not that great at it at all. And every single one of these players is going to have a stat line that's going to give them a whole bunch of different stats and allow them to do different things at various different levels of ability. Your first stat you're going to have is going to be your MA, which is your move allowance, which shows how many squares you can move on the board. Now every one of these squares on the board, now you probably can't see in this video, but there are little micro squares on the board, and you can basically move in any of the 8 directions. You move diagonal, forward, backwards, left to right. It does not matter. You can only move up to 8 squares unless you use one of the rules that allow you to go for it. And I'll explain that in a little bit, but basically this is how many squares you can legally move with that player. Some players like catchers have a really high move allowance, and some players such as the black orc blockers are really slow, moving walls that only have a movement of 4. That's as far as you can move. The next statistic is going to be your strength. Now strength is going to be using the block dice only. This is the only time the block dice are going to be used, and they're going to be used for all your strength tests. And basically you're going to compare your strength to the strength of the person who is blocking you or you're trying to block, and you're going to roll a certain amount of dice, and you're going to look at it for a specific result based on a table. And the amount of these dice you're going to roll is going to be based on the difference between the 2 strengths. And the person with the higher strength is the one who gets to actually select the result. But I'll explain that in just a little bit. The next statistic you have is your agility. Now agility is used for pretty much everything in the game except for blocking. Agility is used for throwing. Agility is used for doing things such as trying to dodge. Agility is used for trying to catch the ball. Agility is your biggest stat for doing everything that doesn't involve blocking, and you're basically going to roll one of these standard 6-sided dice. And in this game, you're trying to get your roll on the dice plus your agility stat plus and minus any bonuses based on exactly what you're doing, and then all that needs to equal 7 or higher. If it equals 7 or higher, it's a success. If it's 7 or if it's under 7, it's going to be a failure. Also, one other thing to remember on this game, the game does come with special dice that shows a BB symbol for the 6, and then the other side is going to be a 1. Anytime you roll a natural 1 in this game, doesn't matter what you're doing, if you roll a natural 1, it fails, no matter how much the penalties or bonuses are stacked in your favor. And if you roll a natural 6, the thing you're trying to do is always a success. It doesn't matter the penalties and bonuses that are stacked against you. 6 always does it, a 1 always fails. And again, basically, you're going to roll the die. You're going to add your agility and then add or subtract any bonuses. If you get to 7 or higher, you succeed. 6 or less, you fail, and you're probably going to suffer a turnover. The next thing and the final statistic you're going to have is your armor value. Now basically armor values decide if you manage to get hurt really badly when you're slammed onto the ground. And basically what's going to happen is if somebody tries to blitz you, and if you get knocked down, the person who did the blitzing, not the owner of the player, the person who actually did the blitzing who's trying to hurt you, is going to roll the dice. If they roll higher than your armor value, you're going to be injured, and then the person doing the blitzing gets to roll the dice again to figure out how badly you're hurt. Again, it's not the person knocked down, it's the person doing the injuring who rolls the dice. So if I rolled a 9, that'd be higher than my armor value. I have some kind of injury of some kind. I'd roll the dice to see how injured I would be, and an 8 is a knocked out. So this player would be knocked out and moved to the knockout section of my dugout, meaning I can't come back onto the board until there is a touchdown or the half ends. So that's basically all the stats for all the players. That explains to you how all the players work. There's only a couple more things you're going to use the dice for. There's a special 16-sided die. I wouldn't worry about this die unless you start playing the league play rules where you start building up your teams start advancing. But basically, you're going to number all of your players, and anytime you need to roll a randomizer to see which one of your players is affected, you're going to roll that 16-sided die, and that's the player who is going to be affected. Now, you can never have more than 16 players on your team, and you always can never have more than 11 players on the pitch, and you can't never have less than 3 players on the pitch. And I'll explain that a little bit unless you're having some desperation going on. But this is a randomizer for rolling for that. And then finally, you have an 8-sided die, and the only thing this is ever used for is when the ball bounces. You're going to use this little device right here, and you're going to place it down the last square the ball landed on, roll the die, and that's going to tell you which direction the ball would bounce. And if we rolled a 4, we would see the ball would have bounced to that section. That's basically how all the dice work, how the players work. And now let's go ahead and move on to actually how Blood Bowl plays. Blood Bowl is basically fantasy football set in the world of Warhammer, except this is an alternate world of Warhammer. And if you've ever read the Shannara Chronicles by Terry Brooks, you have a rough idea of what's going on here. This is an alternate Warhammer world, which is actually Earth's future. And basically the 30-second version of this is some orcs and some dwarves are doing what they do best, beating the living tar out of each other with swords, bows, and arrows, and everything like that, when they called a quick ceasefire because one of the orcs found a book that had NFL on it. Well, unfortunately, orcs can't read, so they picked one of the oldest, wisest dwarves they can find, who was the most sober, and that's saying a lot for a dwarf, who tried to translate this book of NFL, which turned into the rules on Nuffle, and they all decided that it looked like a lot more fun to fight their wars on the gridiron than to beat the living snot out of each other with swords, bows, and arrows, and every other weapon they can imagine. Of course, that hasn't gone away completely because they still sneak weapons onto the battlefield. But if you understand how American football works, you have a rough idea of exactly how Blood Bowl works. The eventual goal of the game, and I say eventual goal because not all the teams like to play this way, is to get one of your players in possession of the ball and run the ball into the opponent zone's end zone and to score touchdowns. You're going to play over 2 halves, and whichever team has the most touchdowns at the end of the game is going to be the winner. Of course, the orcs have a rough, strange idea that beating the other opponent's team into the ground, plus scoring touchdowns, is a little more fun, but hey, that's orcs for you. Before the start of the game, there's a couple things we need to do, and these are some of the advanced rules of the game, and you don't have to play with them, but I suggest you definitely do because they are very much in the spirit of Blood Bowl. The first thing we need to do is each coach needs to roll a 6-sided die, and they're going to roll 1 6-sided die. And this is going to judge how many of these special play cards they get to pick. And you can pick from either one of these decks. You have the random event special play cards, and you have the miscellaneous mayhem special events cards. If you roll a 1, and again, each coach gets to roll themselves, so one coach can roll better than the other one, and that's just, again, part of the fun of the game. But if you roll only a 1, you get to pick 1 card from either one of the decks. If you roll a 2 through 5, you get to pick 2 cards, and again, that can be from either of the decks. And finally, if you roll a 6 or the special Blood Bowl symbol, because that is a 6 on the die, you get to draw up to 3 of these cards. Next thing you need to do is you need to get to roll on the kickoff table to figure out what exactly the weather is going to be like exactly for that special specific kickoff. Now, before we go any further, I want to let you know I am showing this a little bit out of order here, but I did want to zoom in on the kickoff table and then explain to you exactly how this works and the actual scheme of the games. Because the kickoff table is going to be used every single time we're going to kick off the ball to the other team, which means basically after every single touchdown, at the start of the game, and also after the start of the second half. So this kickoff table is going to be used quite often. And it does mention fame, and also if we use this, and it is an optional rule, it does require us to have every single one of our players numbered. That way we can use the die that allows us to select special specific players once referenced in the kickoff table. Now, as you've probably seen, I already have my orcs primed in black, which means I'm going to be painting them. They do come in the basic green, and the human team does come in the blue when you buy the game. But again, I'm painting all my miniatures, or should say all my players, because I want them all painted. So I haven't attached the stickers yet. So if you notice, they have no stickers on them giving their numbers. So I just want to give you a quick heads up on why that looks like that. But if you do use the kickoff table, you are going to have to use the transfers to put a number on every single one of these players, or just figure out a way to number all of your players individually, because it is going to be required for the kickoff table itself. Also, the kickoff table does mention something called fame. Now, in the basic box, without using the league rules, the human team and also the orc team both have a fame of 6. But when you start playing with the league rules, you're going to notice that if one team has higher fame than the other one, they're going to get a +1, and their fame doubles the other team, they're going to get a +2. But the kickoff table is going to be used quite a bit. I just wanted to zoom in on it. Now let's go and pull everything out and show you exactly how this is all going to work. First things first, now that you understand the basics of the special play cards and the kickoff table, now we need to actually play the game. Now, the start of the game and after every single touchdown and after the beginning of the second half, we need to figure out exactly who is going to be kicking off to who. Now, the way this is going to work, at the very start of the game, we can do one of two things. We can do the old standby of rolling a die, and whoever rolls highest gets to decide. Or you can go with the more traditional, the more thematic version, where you're going to flip the coin, and you're going to call heads or tails in the air. And if it comes up with the symbol of the team, that's heads. If it comes up with a double B for Blood Bowl, that's going to be tails. And whoever wins the coin toss, or whoever rolls the highest, gets to decide if they want to be the kicking team or if they want to be the receiving team. And this is a very important decision, and it's going to affect your strategy. It's going to matter for both the teams very much, depending on your play style and what kind of strategy you want to play. Basically, you're going to be deciding if you're going to be setting up first or second, and you're basically also going to be deciding if you're going to start with the ball or not. The team that is either decides to kick off, or the team that is actually forced to kick off because of the results of the coin toss or the dice roll, is the one that gets to set up all their players on the board first. Now, there's a couple rules you need to follow when you're setting up all your players on the board. First of all, you notice the board is broken down in a couple different sections. You have your halfway point for the board, which one team is going to start on one half, the other team starts in the other half. And you're going to notice that there's going to be the wide margins over here. You have the 2 wide margins, and then you have the center of the board. And then you have these 14 squares, 7 on each side of the line right here. And this line is going to be called the line of scrimmage. Now, you are required, this is mandatory when you're setting up your team, you have to have at least 3 players on the line of scrimmage. Now, this wide zone does not include the line of scrimmage, so I couldn't put 1 player here, 1 here, and 1 here right on line of scrimmage. That's not the rules. It's mandatory. I have to place at least 3 of my players on the line of scrimmage, which basically means I have 7 squares to choose from, and each team is required to do this. There's also one other additional requirement besides the fact that I can never have more than 11 players on the board at any time. But that's a constant rule unless you're a cheating goblin. You can never have more than 2 players set up on any one of the wide zones. Now, again, this is for setup. Once the ball starts going and things start getting hectic and crazy, your players are going to end up all over the pitch. And I might want to interject here really quick and just let you know that this game is constantly in motion until a touchdown is scored. And that does mean that the game does not stop. This isn't like traditional American football where you're basically playing for 5 seconds at a time and then getting a 2-minute break every 5 seconds like traditional American football. And I'm sure I just ticked off every American football fan out there, but you know what? I'm a soccer fan. Suffer. Back on point here now. I've insulted everybody. Sorry about that. I'm going to get a good laugh out of it, though, personally. After every single touchdown, the game is going to have a chance to pause, and that's the only time that you're going to be able to get players off the field or on the field that doesn't involve an injury. Basically, that means that as your players start getting hurt, they're going to be pulled off the field, and they're not going to get a chance to be replaced until a touchdown occurs or the halftime is happening. Other than that, you're going to be constantly in motion, constantly playing, and that's one of the big differences between Blood Bowl and traditional American football. The game is constantly in motion. You're not going to have timeouts or anything like that, and you're not going to get a chance to pull players back on or off the field except by injuries, and you don't want to lose players by injuries because that actually hurts you. So anyways, like I was saying, when you decide that you are going to be the kicking team or you're forced to be the kicking team, you have to place at least 3 players on the line of scrimmage, and you can't have any more than 2 of your players on either one of the wide zones. So basically, the kicking player needs to figure out how they want to set up their team on the board. I'm just going to set up my team off camera really quick. After the kicking team has set up all of their players on the board, it's now time for the receiving team to set up their players on the board, and they have to follow the exact same rules. They're required to place at least 3 players on the line of scrimmage, no more than 2 players on each one of the wide zones, and of course no more than 11 other players on the board at any time. Now the advantage here to being the receiving team is not only do you get to possibly start with the ball, because remember it's going to be kicked off just like in traditional American football, and it's not necessarily going to land exactly where you want it. So as a receiving team, you want to plan your team placement as logically as possible in the hopes to try to minimize all the risks and all the odds against you in the hopes of getting the ball, because your hope, at least your biggest hope, is that you're going to get a touchback, but most likely that's not going to happen. So you want to place your players in a way that's going to give you the best chance to pick up the ball so you can run it down the field and score a touchdown. So let's go ahead and set up the receiving humans really quick on their side of the board. Once both the teams are set up, the kicking team and the receiving team, it's time to figure out exactly where that ball is going to land, because thematically the kicking team is kicking the ball, and a kick is never 100% accurate, so we don't get to exactly decide exactly where we want it to go. We have a rough idea, and that's part of the strategy of the game. And basically what we're going to do as the kicking team is we're going to pick any one of these squares, and that's going to be where the square we want it to land, but that's not exactly where it's going to land at all. And the idea here is we want to pick a good square that's not going to let the ball go off the board, because if it goes off the board or if it lands back on our half of the field, the other team is going to get what's called a touchback. And basically what touchback means is they can give the ball to any one of their players, and that's the last thing we want to do for the humans, because they're probably going to give it to the thrower, who's going to throw it to the catcher, who's probably going to go in and score a touchdown. So basically we need to pick any square on the board on the opposing team side, and then we're going to figure out exactly where the ball is going to land. Now this isn't a true scatter. Normally when you use a scatter to represent a bounce, the ball only bounces one square. This is actually representing the inaccuracy of a kickoff, so we need to pick what square that we think we are targeting, or then the ball is going to kind of land in that general area. So let's say, just for example, we decide to pick this square right here. Now you don't have to place this template on top of the board. I'm just doing this just to show you exactly how it works. Most people just place it off to the side, keep one face in one direction and the 8 face in the other direction. People can pretty much figure it out from there. But just to show you how this would work, let's say this is a square we're aiming for. Now we need to figure out exactly how inaccurate our kick is going to be. Now again, this isn't a bounce. The ball is actually going to bounce once it lands, and bouncing always causes the ball to move one square. This is representing the inaccuracy of the kick itself. So we're simply going to roll the 8-sided die to figure out which direction the ball is going to go, and then we're going to roll the 6-sided die to see how far it's going to go that direction. Again, we don't want to go off the board, otherwise the team that's receiving gets a touchback. So we rolled a 6, and we also rolled a 2. So when we look at the template right here, we're going to find 6, which happens to be this direction, and we're going to move 2 squares. So this was our target square, so it's going to go 1, 2, and that's where it's possibly going to land. But again, the ball is going to bounce once it hits the pitch. So now we need to figure out which direction it's going to bounce, and we know it's going to go 1 square that direction. So we know 8 is this direction, so that's where the ball is eventually going to land. It's right there on that space. Now again, you don't need to put this template on the board all the time. Most people just keep 1 face in one direction, 8 face in the other direction. You can pretty much figure the scatters from that point on. Now if you do decide that you want to play with all the advanced rules, including the kickoff table and the weather table, and I'm going to cover the weather table all the way at the end of this video, because that's one of those advanced rules I definitely think you probably should not include on your first couple of games, because it can be very unforgiving, especially people like me who like to play the Dark Elf and the Skaven teams, because it can be kind of brutal, those kind of players. But if you do decide to play with all the advanced rules, including the kickoff table, before you roll for the bounce on the ball, you actually need to pull out the table for the kickoff table and see if you have any results on the kickoff table. And again, that's going to be done before the bounce of the ball. And then after you roll for the kickoff table, you're going to figure out and calculate where the ball is going to bounce. And then if it happens to land on any of the players on the receiving team, they have to perform a catch action. I'll explain catches in just a little bit. But if it just lands anywhere on the pitch, then it's now time for the receiving team to start activating all their players to pick up that ball to try to score a touchdown. Now also don't forget the ball manages to fall off the pitch or onto the kicking team's side of the pitch. That means the receiving team is going to suffer or receive a touchback, which means they get to give the ball to any one of their players. So as a kicking team, you want to make sure that does not happen, because especially versus good throwy and runny teams like the human teams or the Dark Elf teams, you're going to be in a world for hurt, because they're going to catch that ball, give it to one of their throwers, throw it out to one of the receivers, and go out there and score a very quick touchdown, gaining points. One quick note about the kickoff table, though: you cannot use any of your team rerolls to reroll any of the results in the kickoff table, so you basically have to suffer whatever comes upon from the kickoff table. And also one other thing, there's going to be something called fame on the kickoff table, and I already touched on it a little bit earlier, But to figure out the fame for every one of our teams, basically you're going to take your fan factor. And remember, each one of our teams starts with a fan factor of 6. And you can roll 2d6, add your fan factor in, and whoever has the higher roll of the fan factor plus the 2d6 is going to be the team that has the more fame. So they're going to get a +1 to their fame. And the team that is the ones with the lower amount of fan factor plus that 2d6 roll gets a +0. Now, if something really bad happens and you get a really bad roll versus a very good roll, and you manage to have double the amount of the roll plus the fan factor of the other team, you actually get +2. So, for example, if the Orcs have a fan factor of 6, and we roll 2, that's going to be 8. And if the humans roll really, really lucky, and I roll a 12, plus 6 is going to be an 18. So 8 times 2 is 16, so we're going to more than double, so our fame is going to be +2 versus their 0. So that's basically how the kickoff table works. Now, what the rest of the game is basically going to work is the receiving team is going to get a chance to move all of their players unless they suffer a turnover. And then all the kickoff team is going to get a chance to move all their players until they suffer a turnover or until they move all their players. We're basically going to go back and forth, with every team completing all the actions they can with their players that they want to complete. It's not mandatory. You don't have to move all of your players, but you're basically going to keep going until you suffer a turnover or until you manage to score a touchdown. And we're going to do this whole process all over again until we reach the end of the first half. And then once we reach the end of the first half, we're going to do another kickoff. But this is actually going to be the team that received the very first half of the game is going to be the kicking team in the second half. It doesn't matter where it was in position-wise for the kickoffs going back and forth on the prior half of the game. On the second half, the ones that were the receiving team on the first half has to be the kicking team on the second half. We're basically going to keep going back and forth until the end of the second half, and whoever has the most touchdowns is going to be the winner of the game. Before I go on and explain to you exactly how all these players take all their actions, because that's actually the easiest part of the game, because you're basically going to give every one of your players one single action until you're done deciding that you want to take any actions. And once you're done with that, your turn is over. But the really important thing to understand about Blood Bowl is the concept of the turnover, and that's where the game becomes a press your luck element, knowing how to hedge the odds in your favor and knowing how to take advantage of any odds, making the odds go much better in your favor so you never become a victim of the dice, which will be the biggest challenge for you in the game of Blood Bowl. Turnovers are the biggest concept in Blood Bowl to understand, because basically the way this game is going to go is you're going to move all of your players until you basically mess something up and then you suffer a turnover. And it doesn't matter what you're in the middle of doing unless you're trying to roll for an armor save or something like that. But beyond that, your turn is over if you suffer a turnover. So that'd be very crippling for your team, especially if your very first action you do on your turn suffers a turnover because you failed so miserably. You'll basically spend your entire turn moving one of your players, and then the other player is going to cackle in glee as they get a chance to move all their players and basically mess up all of your plans. Now, there's a couple different very important things that can cause a turnover. The very first thing that can happen is if you ever fail on a block and you, as the person trying to attempt a block, get knocked down. And how do you do that? Well, you do something like I've already shown right here. You roll 2 skulls on the dice when you're trying to do a knockdown or a tackle or a block of any kind. So if I was trying to block with this lineman and try to take out this orc blocker right here, this black orc blocker right here, I would roll 2 dice because he's stronger. I'll explain how this works in just a minute. But this would be a miserable roll for me, and I would suffer a knockdown on my attempt at a block, which means I would just suffer a turnover. So the only thing left for me to do is I would roll my armor, or actually the orc player would roll their armor to see if they manage to injure me. And again, that's going to be a roll of 2 dice. I'll show you how all that works. And if they roll higher than my armor, they're going to roll for an injury, and I can just totally mess myself up and take my own player off the board, possibly knocking him out, possibly creating a casualty, or maybe just getting stunned if I'm lucky. So that's one of the first ways you can suffer a turnover, is by completely failing on a block or a blitz and basically knocking yourself down. The next way you can suffer a turnover is if a pass or a handoff is failed to be caught by a player on your own team. And the emphasis here is if it's failed to be caught by a player on your own team. So let's just say things were going wildly against us, but also luck happened to be on our side. If this thrower happened to have the ball and we tried to throw it to this catcher, and let's say this catcher failed to catch the ball. Well, if he fails to catch the ball is going to bounce off of him and go a random direction. So as soon as it misses, our turn is not over. We have not suffered a turnover yet, because if by some miracle we happen to roll a 1 on the scatter and it lands on top of our blitzer right here, and then by another miracle our blitzer manages to catch the ball, and guess what? We don't suffer a turnover because we have successfully caught the ball in our turn. The only way we suffer a turnover is if our pass and then the attempt to catch fails to land in the hands of one of our own players. That's very important. You need to understand the distinction, It's not the failure to throw, it's not the failure to catch. It's the failure to retain possession of the ball by the end of all those actions. And it goes for a pass and it also goes for a handoff. So it's very important to remember, if either of those completely fail by the end of the complete series of actions, then it's a turnover. Otherwise, you can be very lucky and retain control of the ball. There is one slight caveat to though, and that comes in the advanced rules when you use the fumble rules. And this is one advanced rule I definitely suggest you use when you play the game. I'll explain fumbles, how they work in a couple moments when I explain how to do the throwing and the catching. But if you ever suffer a fumble, which is basically a roll of 1 on the dice after all modifiers, then you have basically fumbled the ball and you are going to suffer an immediate turnover and it's also going to bounce. And if it happens to be a situation where you happen to have your lonely thrower way back here and a line of orcs about to drill down and come down and beat down on you, you're going to be in a world of hurt really, really quick because it's a turnover and it's going to give a chance for the other player to come in and start doing a little smashing on you. The next way you can suffer a turnover is if you fail to pick up the ball successfully when you enter the square. Now, if you enter a square with a ball under your own attempt and you're moving there because you want to move there, and that's very important because if you get blocked, you can actually be pushed back. And if you were to be pushed back into the square with a ball, such as if this orc happened to be blocking this thrower, then it's not going to be a turnover because you weren't trying to pick up the ball. But if you ever intentionally move one of your players into the square that the ball happens to be, they have to try to pick up the ball. It's mandatory. And they fail to pick up the ball, it's going to be a turnover for the team. Another way you can suffer a turnover is if you're using the advanced rules for fouling. And now fouling is another one of those advanced rules that you may or may not want to use. I suggest you use it with the teams that come in the box, but if you start playing with some of the more advanced teams and the more advanced rules, it can be a little brutal to some of the teams, but again, it's part of the spirit of the game, so I definitely suggest using the foul rules. But if you, as a player, foul another player who is down, and if you're caught with your foul, meaning a referee catches you on the foul, that means your player is going to be possibly ejected off the field, depending on the results of the foul table. They're going to be ejected for the rest of the game or just till the next touchdown occurs or the end half occurs. But if you are successfully caught in a foul by a coach, your team suffers a turnover. Finally, there's one more advanced rule that's going to suffer you a turnover, and we're only going to add this in the video just for completeness sake because it's not going to be allowed in the base box. It's going to require some more advanced teams, but basically with some of the more advanced teams and the advanced rules, large creatures can throw smaller creatures. So it's very common to have teams such as a treeman team that'll pick up one of their halflings and toss them down the field, or an ogre team that'll pick up a goblin who happens to be holding the ball and they'll throw that goblin ball and all down the field in the hopes that the goblin will land correctly. Of course, in the reality of Blood Bowl and the fun and the craziness and the randomness of the game, it doesn't always work out in your favor, and if you successfully throw a teammate and they fail to land on their feet, or if you fail to successfully throw them in the first place, it's going to be a turnover for your team. The final way you're going to suffer a turnover, and again I shouldn't say suffer here because this is the ultimate goal, is by accomplishing a touchdown. Now if you accomplish a touchdown, your team's turn is over and it's basically going to go to another kickoff. Now it is, and this seems very, very crazy, it is possible to score a touchdown on the other player's team. And the way that this can happen, and this is going to be extremely rare, but it can happen, and when it happens you get extra rights to jump up and down, scream and holler and start pointing fingers and saying told you so, or anything you want to do at the other player. But if another player on their turn does a block against you and the block fails for some reason, or if you get very, very lucky and you get pushed back into the end zone, your team is going to score a touchdown, but there's one minor penalty. You spend the whole turn jumping around so much and enjoying your grand victory, scoring a touchdown on the other player's turn. You need to make sure you advance your turn marker one turn. So basically you're going to lose a turn, but you get a free touchdown out of it, so I don't think you're going to complain too much about that. So now that we've understand how the turnovers work, the next thing you understand is basically the play of the game of Blood Bowl itself. Now the game of Blood Bowl is actually pretty darn simple to play. There's only 6 different actions you can perform with each one of your players total, and these are 6 different kinds of actions you can perform. Now of these 6 actions, only 2 of them can be performed as many times as you want, of course once per player. The other 4 actions can only be attempted once per turn for your entire team. So the total amount of actions you can do is you can move, and again that's going to allow you to move as much as your move allowance. The next thing you can do is you can do a block. The next action you can perform, and this is one of the first of the 4 actions that you only do once per team turn, and that's going to be a blitz action, and that means any one of your players can do it. It's not only unique to blitzers. Blitzers just happen to be very, very good at it, but anybody can do a blitz action. Even a catcher can do it. But once you announce your blitz action, none of your other players on your team can perform a blitz action that turn. Only one of your players can do it, and then you're stuck with any one of the other remaining 5 actions. The next action you can do on your turn is a throw action. And again, this is another one of those actions you can only do once per turn. So any one of your players on the field can do it. Even a blitzer can throw the ball. It just means that they're not quite as good as it. Your throwers are the ones who are best at throwing the ball. The next action you can do is you can do what's called a handoff. Now, handing off is again another one of those actions you can only do once per turn, but it's a lot safer than throwing the ball. The only problem is you don't get those grand plays of doing the Hail Mary play where you throw the ball all the way down the field. The final action you can only do once per team turn is a foul action. And again, I'm going to explain how all these actions work, but basically the way this is going to work is any one of your players can do any one of the 6 actions, except some of the actions can only be performed once per turn. So once you've done the 4 actions of fouling, throwing, passing, or doing a blitz action, the only remaining actions for any of remaining players who have not activated is a move or a block action. So those are all the 6 actions. Let's go and explain how all those 6 actions actually work. First action we have up is movement. Now movement is pretty darn easy. That's basically going to be the movement allowance of your player. And every single player has a movement allowance, and that's how many squares they can move. And now you can move forward, backwards, left and right, orthogonally, you can move diagonally. But there's a trick you have to be careful of, because this is something I've explained, Dan, where you're going to explain it now. That's the concept of tackle zones. See, every single player exerts a tackle zone around the 8 squares surrounding that single player. And these tackle zones are going to make it very difficult for players to move around them. See, if you ever want to leave a tackle zone from an opposing player's team, you need to make a successful dodge roll. And if you fail the dodge roll, you may suffer a knockdown. Again, if you suffer a knockdown, guess what? It's a turnover. Your turn is over. So again, that's what I was talking about earlier, where you want to hedge your bets and move all your players that have the least chance of failure before you start doing the more riskier moves. So basically, the way this is going to work is you can move up to your move allowance, and I'm going to explain going for in just a minute, which is to give you some free extra moves, possibly if you want to take the risk. But anytime you want to leave a tackle zone for an opposing player, you need to make what's called a dodge roll. And the dodge roll is going to be based on your agility. So let's go ahead and take our basic lineman right here, who we see has a basic agility of 3. And we're going to have to make a successful roll to see if we can successfully dodge out of the way of this black orc blocker. I'm sorry, this is actually a lineman because I removed the black orc blocker earlier. But if I want to move successfully out of the tackle zone of this orc, I need to make a successful roll. And this is always going to matter just moving out of the tackle zone. Moving into the tackle zone itself does not require a dodge roll. It's the act of actually moving out of the tackle zone itself. So to make a successful roll, I need to roll the 6-sider, add my agility to the roll, add +1 because I'm trying to attempt a dodge, and then I'm going to subtract 1 for every single tackle zone I happen to be entering from the tackle zone I'm leaving. So to give you a really good example of this lineman right here that we're using as our victim currently, and I'm going to say victim because this orc is probably going to pound him if he can, but since I am trying to leave this tackle zone to go into this square which does not have any tackle zones over it, I'm going to make a simple roll of a d6. I'm going to add +1 to my roll, and then I'm going to add my total agility. But this is also a really good time to explain to you that in this game, anytime you roll a natural 1, no matter what you're attempting to do, it's an automatic failure, and anytime you roll a natural 6 or the Blood Bowl symbol, it's always a success. It doesn't matter the penalties or the bonuses that have to be stacked in your favor or against you. And of course, you can see just my luck with the dice here, but if I had rolled this 1, I would have failed to dodge out. I would leave the square because the failure happens on the square I was going to, but then I would suffer a turnover because I'd be knocked down, and then the orc player would get the roll against my armor. And a 7 doesn't beat my 8, so I would be okay there. And I'll explain how all that works in just a couple minutes, but just know that would have been a complete failure. But let's just say that the dice aren't hating me that badly right now. Let's try to do that roll again in just a second. But let's say we're also trying to dodge into another opponent's tackle zone. So we see that this orc right here has a tackle zone around all these squares, and this orc also has a tackle zone in all the squares surrounding it also. If we were trying to move from this square to this square, we're moving from one orc's tackle zone to another orc's tackle zone. We're going to roll the 6-sider, add +1 because we're doing a dodge, and then we're going to add our agility, then we're going to subtract 1 because we're entering on another tackle zone. Now if we happen to be entering 2 tackle zones, which would be a very crazy maneuver, I'd have to subtract 2 from my roll. And if I was really, really gutsy and trying to enter 3 tackle zones, I'd have to subtract 3 from my roll. meaning that I have a pretty slim chance of succeeding because your target number you're always trying to make is always a 7. So I need to get this plus and minus any bonuses to equal 7 or higher to succeed. And 7 is pretty much the magic number for all of Blood Bowl. You basically want a 7 or higher for everything to succeed. Of course, a natural 6 always makes it. A natural 1 always fails, unless we're talking about fumbling, which is a natural 1 will fail. But also, if your penalties make your total come to a 1 or less, you also fail. But I'll explain how all that works in just a moment. A player can also do what's called going for it, which is going to allow them to potentially get some extra moves out of their movement. And I should mention right here now, because I actually haven't mentioned this yet, and this is very important. Once you've activated a player and performed any action you want to do with that player, you can't go back and do any more actions with that player. So I couldn't, for example, move this player 2 spaces, move this player a couple spaces, move this player a couple more spaces. Once a player has been activated, their turn is pretty much over for the entire turn. But to go ahead and explain how to go for it, basically what you're going to do, once you have moved your total movement allowance, so this guy right here is going to be a blitzer, which means he have a move allowance of 7. So if I move 7 spaces, I can do what's called a go for it action. And you can do a go for it action up to 2 times. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to announce you're going for it, and you're going to move to the square you want to go to, and then you're going to roll a 6-sider. If you roll a 1, you're going to fall in the square you're trying to get into, and then you're going to roll to see if you're injured, and you're going to do an armor check, and then you're going to see if you're injured if you fail that armor check. If you manage to successfully roll and not fail when you try to go for it, again, you can try a second time to go for it, and again, you're going to roll again. If you succeed, that's basically the end of going for it. The final action you can do with movement is you can also try to pick up the ball by moving into the square that the ball happens to be in. Now, to successfully pick up the ball, again, it's going to be a roll of the 6-sider plus your agility plus or minus a couple bonuses and penalties. And much just like dodging, this is going to be versus any possible tackle zones you may be having to interfere with that may be making it a little more difficult for you to pick up the ball. So to try to pick up the ball, you're basically going to get +1 for doing an attempt at picking up the ball. That's the action you're trying to attempt. And you get -1 to your roll for every single tackle zone you have to be trying to pick up that ball in. So in this example right here, we have our thrower right here. We see that their agility is 3, so we get +1 for picking up a ball, -1 because we're in a tackle zone. Our target is 7 because that's the magic number we want in Blood Bowl. We roll the die, we get 2 plus 3 is 5, +1 for picking it up is 6, -1 for the tackle zone is going to be back down to a 5. We have failed to pick up the ball. And again, if we fail to pick up the ball, we suffer a turnover and our turn has come to an end. The next action we have up is the block action. Now the block action is going to be used pretty interestingly. It's actually going to use the strength of each one of the players involved. So let's say we're going to have this lineman try to block this lineman over here. And we see that each one of our linemen happens to have a strength of 3. So the strengths are equal. And the amount of block dice you're going to be rolling is going to be based on the difference in the strengths. Now, if the strengths happen to be equal on both of our players, we're going to roll 1 block die. Now, if one player happens to be stronger than the other player, for example, this black orc was trying to block this lineman, we would roll 2 dice. And if the total strength between them more than doubles, then we're going to roll 3 dice. And that's rarely going to happen unless we start using the assist rules. And again, the assist rules are a little bit more advanced, and they're in the advanced section, but they're definitely a rule I recommend you use. Now, the way assisting works, and assisting does not use up the player's action for the turn, so it's basically a freebie, so you definitely want to use an assist. And basically what this is going to be is every player on your team who can successfully assist you is going to add 1 to your strength statistic. And the way this is going to work is you're going to figure out, let's say this lineman, again, wants to block this orc lineman right here. Every single orc that is adjacent to the person doing the block action and is not currently in another opposing player's, and I must emphasize another opposing player's tackle zone, can assist in the block. So in this example right here, we see that this lineman is very much outclassed because he has 3 strength versus a 3 strength, but they get +1 plus another +1 because neither one of these orcs are in any opposing tackle zones beyond the tackle zone of the player they're assisting on the block. So this would be a 3 plus versus a 3, 4, 5. So their strength outnumbers their strength, so we're going to roll 2 dice. Now the amount of dice we're going to roll is always constant, but who decides the dice we're going to use is picked by the stronger player. So the human team is going to roll the dice because they're the ones performing the action, but the defender, since their total strength is higher than the attacker's total strength, they get to pick which one of the dice they want to use. Now there's 5 different results we can get from these dice, and they range all the way from the attacker going down to the attacker and the blocker both going down to a pushback to the attacker knocking the blocker down unless they have a certain skill, or the final result is that the blocker goes down. It doesn't matter what skills they happen to have. After we figure out the results for an attempted block, we're going to figure out if anybody's going to be pushed back. And if anybody's pushed back, they're basically pushed back into 3 squares behind them. So again, if we're trying to block here and we managed to succeed, and we actually did succeed with this roll here, we would be able to push this orc back into any one of these 3 squares, and that orc would be knocked down. And then we, as the attacker, would do a roll to see if we can beat their armor. And in this case, we rolled an 11, so we definitely did beat their armor value. So now we're going to roll to see what potential injury we're going to do against them. Now if we roll a 2 through a 7, they're simply going to be stunned, laid face down, and that means they don't get to recover until the end of the next round, because they're basically going to turn face up at that time. If we roll an 8 or a 9, they're going to be knocked out and sent to the knocked out bin. And if we roll a 10, 11, or 12, they're going to actually become a casualty removed from the rest of the game. Now, knockouts aren't that terrible, because after every single touchdown and also after the end of the half, every single player, before we're going to line up all of our players on the board, every single player in the knockout bin is going to roll a d6 for that player. If you roll a 1, 2, or 3, they're going to stay knocked out. If you roll a 4, 5, or 6, they're going to move back into the reserves, which means they can be put out on that drive. Next up, we have the grand play, the grand awesome play, the attempt to throw the ball. Now, throwing the ball is going to use the range ruler right here, which is a pretty large range ruler, and it's basically going to show you exactly how hard it is to make a successful throw, because you're going to see various ranges. So anytime you are going to use this range ruler, you have this little hole on one end that you're going to place over the head of the person who's throwing the ball. And then you're going to see where the target falls within all these ranges. Now you're going to see these little lines everywhere on the range ruler, and that's going to decide how far they are out on the ranges. Now if your target is on the line between 2 ranges, you're going to use the longer range of the 2. And basically every one of these ranges are going to give various bonuses or penalties depending on how far out your target is. So a quick pass is going to be +1, a short pass is going to be 0, next one's going to be -1, and then the final one's going to be at -2. And basically the way this doesn't work, let's say our plucky little thrower over here happens to have the ball. We're going to put the range ruler over the head, and we're going to see all of our potential targets, and we're going to see exactly how any of those potential targets going to be on our range. And basically, just like always, we're going to roll a standard 6-sider, and we're going to see if we have any luck with our roll. And there's going to be bonuses and penalties based on how far out our target is, whether we happen to be in any tackle zones of any other players, and that's basically what's going to be, see if we're going to succeed on a roll to successfully throw the ball. So basically, we look for our target, and we're going to see that target has to be in the range, and we're going to hope for a lot of luck. The thing we have to be very careful of, though, is if we lay this ruler down, if any opposing players from the opposing team happen to be between us and our recipient and happen to fall under this ruler at any point, they can attempt an interception. And if they want to attempt an interception, they're basically going to make an agility roll with the bonuses and the penalties. If they succeed, they successfully intercept the ball, and it's an immediate turnover for their team. They get the ball, and they start taking their turn immediately. But if we don't suffer any interceptions and we succeed at our throw and we don't fumble the ball, because remember, if we fumble the ball when we're throwing it, which is a 1 natural or a total of 1 after all bonuses or penalties, that's also going to cause a turnover. But as long as we don't fumble, as long as we don't suffer an interception, our target is going to try to catch the ball. Now to catch the ball, again, it's going to be another agility roll with bonuses and penalties. If they successfully catch the ball, things are wonderful. We get to keep going with our team, especially if that player has not activated yet. But if they've activated, they can't do any other actions. Although if they have activated, they can still catch. They just can't take any other actions that turn. But if that player fails to catch the ball, again, we're going to make another agility check with all the bonuses and penalties. If they fail to catch the ball is going to bounce, and we're going to use the scatter template, and it's going to bounce 1 square over, and then we're also going to suffer a turnover. And now I didn't mention this earlier when I was talking about the blocks, but if a player is holding the ball and they are successfully blocked by another player and they are knocked back, they're going to drop the ball in the square they land in, and then it's going to bounce using the scatter template again with the D8, and that's where the ball is going to land. And you have to be very, very careful, because when you block, you can move up in the space of the other player that you blocked, and that means that you can potentially also catch the ball, again suffering a turnover there. So if this lineman had blocked this thrower successfully, knocked him back, moved into that square, and if we were lucky enough to roll a 1 in this example, we would get a chance to catch the ball. And if we successfully caught the ball, it would be a turnover and we would get to continue our play. And also, it would also be a turnover if we failed to catch the ball, because remember, if you drop the ball and get knocked down, it's also a turnover for your team. A player with the ball can also do a handoff, which is actually a much safer move than trying to do an actual throw itself. The only problem is you don't get any movement, because when you do a throw action, you can move up to your movement allowance and then perform the throw action. So let's say this orc didn't happen to be there blocking our thrower. Our thrower decides to do a a throw action, and their movement allowance is a total of 6. So we could take a movement, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we could throw the ball if we wanted to. Or what we could do is we could do what's called a handoff, which means we don't have to do any rolls for a successful throw. The person we're handing the ball off to, though, does have to do a successful roll for a catch, though. And again, if they fail, it's going to be a turnover for our team. So we could do a pass or handoff action by moving next to another player, handing them over the ball, and if they successfully catch the ball, they can continue to move with that ball. But remember, we can only do 1 handoff action per turn, only 1 pass action per turn, but you can actually do both. So we could get a little bit tricky if we wanted to. We could throw the ball to this player who could move up, hand it over to this player who can then make a run down the field and try to score a touchdown. So that's a good way to show all the possible strategies and a lot of the possible tactics for the game there. So only a couple of quick things left to mention, and you pretty much understand a lot of how Blood Bowl works. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is if a player happens to be all the way at one end of the board, and if another player comes along and blocks them and knocks them off the board, completely off the board, they're going to be attacked by all the fans. Now, they don't get an armor roll. They're going to get an immediate injury roll. We're going to roll on the injury table to see just how bad they would have been injured by the attacking fans. And again, we're going to roll on the injury table and see just how bad they are. They may just get stunned or whatever happens, but they're going to get knocked out or possibly suffer a casualty, and that's what happens if you get knocked off the board. If you happen to be having the ball, or if the ball happens to go completely off the board, the fans are going to throw the ball back in, and we're going to use a scatter template right here. And we're simply going to place the template over the last spot that the ball happened to be in when it went off the board. Then we're going to roll a d6 to see which direction the ball is going to go, and then we're going to roll 2d6 to see just how far it happens to go in that direction. Now, it is possible through some random chance or some really bad luck, depending on where the ball happens to go off the field, for it to go off the field multiple times. And if it keeps going off the field, we're going to keep rolling until it manages to land back on the field. And of course, don't forget, anytime the ball lands anywhere, it's always going to bounce one time. So we need to roll for the scatter to see which direction it's going to go when we scatter the ball, because it bounces. And then if any players happen to be in the target square where the ball happens to be bouncing into, they get the chance to catch the ball. Just a couple things left to explain to you how to play Blood Bowl, and the rest of it's pretty darn easy, especially with these nice reference sheets that come with the game, because they're basically going to cover a lot of the rules in very good detail, and it's going to be a lot easier just to pull out this reference sheet than me to go over in painstaking detail every single one of these things, because all the bonuses and penalties are all listed right here. It makes the game extremely easy to learn how to play. But there's a couple quick things left to mention. The next thing left to mention is the rules about fouling. Now, fouling is a rule you may or you may not want to include when you play the game. It's going to depend on how you feel. Some people really like the rules, some people don't. I think they are definitely in the spirit of the game. But the way fouling works is generally whenever a player is down on the ground, you're never allowed to attack any player on the ground unless you use the fouling rules. And basically the way this is going to work is if you call a foul action, you're going to move up to your movement allowance, then you're going to place yourself prone next to your target. Now, since you're placing yourself prone and you're not actually being knocked down, you're not suffering a turnover, you're just placing your player prone. And then you're going to make an armor roll versus the armor of the target that you're trying to block or that you're trying to foul. If you roll higher than their armor, like we did in this case, you're then going to roll on the injury table. The trick here is, though, is that if you roll doubles for your attempt to injure that player, the referee catches your attempt to foul, and then you're going to be removed for the rest of the game. So you have to be very careful about fouling the other players. It is risky, and there's also the possibility that you need to remember that just like blocking another player, any players on your team who are close by are going to add +1 to your roll on the armor table. and any opposing players who are next to your target are going to subtract 1 from your armor roll. That's not going to affect the doubles, though. If you do roll a natural doubles, though, you're caught by the ref, and you're going to be sent off the field for the rest of the game. The final thing to explain to you, besides the weather table, and again, I did want to save that weather table for last because I wanted to add a couple comments about it, but the only thing left to explain to you is team rerolls and player rerolls themselves. Now, the game does allow you to have rerolls, and every single team starts with a certain amount of rerolls. Again, our human team starts with 4, and our orc team starts with 3 rerolls. These are total rerolls you can use for any one of the basic actions that you can perform on the board at all, but you get to use these as many times based on your turn team amount per half of the game, though. So the orc players have 3 team rerolls per half of the game, and again, at the start of the second half, that's going to refresh. The human players get 4 per half, and again, that's going to refresh at the start of the second half. Also, don't forget that all those players, and again, remember how I said earlier that some players are just better at doing certain things? Well, all the players, or most of the players, have certain skills that allow them to do various things. Now, all these skills are listed here, but basically what they're going to do is it's going to make them better at certain things. So, for example, throwers have the throw skill, which means they can use a reroll if they fail to throw the ball. Then there's catchers who have the catching skill, who can reroll the ball, reroll the die if they fail to catch the ball. Here's the trick, though. You can't use a player reroll and a team reroll at the same time. So generally you want to use player rerolls if they're available, and then if the player rerolls are not available, you want to use your team rerolls. But the dice can never be rolled more than once by any reroll action. So you're either going to use a player reroll or a team reroll. So again, it makes sense to use player rerolls when they're available. If they're not available, go ahead and fall back to your team rerolls. Again, you only get so many team rerolls per half, so you need to use them wisely. The only thing left is the last thing to mention, that's going to be the weather table itself. Now, I personally am not a huge fan of the weather table because I like to play a lot of the throwing teams, and the unfortunate thing with the throwing table is it penalizes the throwing teams the most, especially if you get a really unlucky roll on the weather table, and the weather table is going to go for the entire game. Now, you can also say the kickoff table can kind of affect the game too, but I like the kickoff table because it's kind of a one-time thing, and it can fly both ways. It can affect both teams and adds a little bit of randomness, a little fun to the game. But the weather table itself can really be a kicker for some throwing teams. Now, I play a throwing team, so maybe I'm biased when I'm saying this, but I'm going to throw that out there just so you understand. I may have a little bit of bias, but do understand the weather table is going to have a constant effect for the entire game. So use it at your own risk, especially since the humans are kind of a throwing team. But basically, again, I'm saving this for last and explain this at the last. I probably should explain in the beginning, but I did want to save it because I want to let you know that you may not want to use it the first couple times you play, but if you do decide to use it, you're basically going to roll on the weather table before the game starts, and that's going to potentially create a penalty that's going to last for the entire game that you're going to have to monitor. Again, for your first couple of games, I suggest you don't use the weather table, but if you want to go for the random craziness, I know there's lots of people who really do enjoy the weather table. Go ahead and use it. But that's basically the entire game of Blood Bowl. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to get them as quickly as I can. Don't forget that the player aids that come with the game do a really great job. They're going to show you all your bonuses and your penalties for all the abilities you can do. And again, there's only a couple things it doesn't list. It doesn't list the passing, it doesn't list the fouling, and it also doesn't list the roll-off for the cards at the beginning of the game. But other than that, this player aid is going to show you how to do everything you need to do for the game. Now, for one final thing here, now that we're done with the basic tutorial for the game, I have a giveaway where I'm going to throw in a giveaway for the Skaven dice that are pretty darn hard to get a hold of these days. And they're pretty darn cool, and if you're going to play a Skaven team, well, you're probably going to want the Skaven dice just because they match your team so well. So basically, this is how we're going to do the giveaway. At the end of the review video, the one I posted in a couple days here, what I would like you to do is just put a post down there what you like about this YouTube channel. Put down anything you want, and you either put the post down on the YouTube link itself, or you can put it over on Board Game Geek itself. Just it has to be under the review video itself. You can't put the comment in this video, you can't put the comment in the sample gameplay video, and you cannot put the comment down in the actual gameplay overview. You have to leave a comment in the review video itself and just a quick little blurb about what you enjoy about this video channel. I'm going to take all the entries from all the people put that in there, and again, if you put a comment on the YouTube and the board game link, I'll give you 2 entries. But out of all those people, you're each going to get an entry, and I'm going to pick one of you who's going to win these Skaven dice, and I'm going to ship it to you. I'll even cover the shipping to you, and that's going to be my giveaway. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video series. Again, if you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. Make sure you also subscribe and like if you like this video series, because your likes and subscriptions matter, because this video series is pretty much taken care of by all your likes. It's what keeps me enjoying the hobby. It makes me enjoy putting these videos out. So make sure you click that like button, click that subscribe button. As always, thanks for watching.